The storm came in hard, the kind of storm that eats sound and color until the world feels emptied out and Rockbridge was drowning beneath it. Snow slammed against the windows of my house in thick sheets carried sideways by a wind sharp enough to slice through bone. The emergency alert on my phone had already repeated twice, telling everyone to stay indoors, shelter in place, avoid all unnecessary travel. I should have listened. I should have ignored the blinking notification from the investment board and stayed home like everyone else. Instead, I pulled on my coat, grabbed my keys, and was heading toward the garage when the motion sensor at my front gate flashed across the hallway screen. Normally, I ignored it. Today, my eyes drifted to the feed. That was when I saw her. A tiny figure stood in the snow, barely upright, barely moving. At first glance, I thought it might have been a stray dog or maybe debris blown by the wind, but then the camera focused just enough to show a blur of pink. A child out in a storm this dangerous. She crossed the street to the house opposite mine and lifted her hand to knock. The sound would have been lost instantly. Their generator rattled loudly beside the porch. The television light flickered through the curtains. No one came. She tried again, weaker this time. The cold had already stiffened her movements. She rubbed her eyes with the back of a trembling hand. Her boots were soaked. Her coat hung crookedly on her small shoulders. I should have turned away. I had told myself that I was already running late. I had told myself that whatever was happening out there was not my problem. I had told myself that I did not need to get involved in anyone else's emergency. Yet I found my hand zooming the camera until her face came into view. That was the moment my heart dropped. Her cheeks were flushed red, not with warmth but with cold burn. Her eyelashes were dusted in snow. Her breath came out in tiny jerks, each one thinner than the last. She wavered on her feet, turned away from the door that had ignored her, and took several steps that looked more like a collapse than a walk. Her foot slipped. She fell to her knees, catching herself only barely. Something hit me in the chest, a pressure I had not felt in years, and for one long second, I could not breathe. I pushed open the front door before I even realized I had moved. The wind hit me immediately, roaring in my ears and spraying ice across my face. The girl turned toward the sound, her attempt at a smile collapsing as her body swayed forward. I reached her just before she fell, her small frame folded into my arms as if she had already given up fighting the cold. I felt her shivering through 3 layers of my coat. Her lips parted, trembling, struggling to form a word she did not have the strength to give. Then she whispered it, barely a thread of sound. "Please, don't let my mom die." My entire body froze. The storm behind me, the meeting waiting across town, the excuses I had practiced, everything fell silent inside my head. Only her voice remained. I steadied her in my arms and spoke gently. "What is your name?" "Mira." Her voice was raw from cold. "Where is your mother?" She lifted a shaking hand and pointed down the street. Through the blur of snow, I could make out the vague shape of an old apartment complex. I pulled my phone out with one hand and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered immediately, guiding me through what to do. I followed every instruction. Warm vehicle, emergency blanket, keep her awake, check for injuries. I opened my car door with my elbow and slid into the back seat, wrapping her in the thick blanket I kept for winter emergencies. She tried to hold on to my coat as if afraid I would disappear. "I am here. I am staying," I told her. Her eyes fluttered, frightened and exhausted. "Please, don't let my mom die." The second time she said it, something inside me cracked open. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, turned the car toward the glowing outline of the apartment buildings through the storm, and drove into the whiteout without a second thought. Because turning left toward my meeting would have destroyed me, and turning right toward the woman her daughter believed I could save was the only choice I could live with. The road disappeared every few seconds as the wind hurled white sheets across the windshield, but I kept driving because Mira's hand refused to let go of mine. It was impossibly small in my grip, cold through the blanket I had wrapped around her. The dispatcher stayed on the line, her voice calm and steady, even as the storm worsened. She told me to keep Mira awake, to watch for signs of hypothermia, to give updates on her breathing. I answered mechanically, my focus split between the road, the child beside me, and the rising panic in my chest. Mira pointed once we reached the row of old brick buildings. The complex looked half buried under snowdrifts. A few porch lights flickered, most were out. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded alive. She lifted her hand weakly toward the third building. Apartment 3B. I parked as close as possible and jumped out, pulling her into my arms again. The wind nearly knocked me sideways as I carried her toward the entrance. The dispatcher asked if I could see anything unusual. I said yes. The front door was cracked open. That alone made my pulse spike. No one in Colorado leaves a door open in a storm unless something is very wrong. Inside was dim and silent, the stale air warmer than outside, but heavy with a smell that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. A faint, metallic bitterness mixed with something sharper. Gas. I pressed a hand over Mira's ear and pushed the door fully open with my shoulder. Step back outside for a moment, the dispatcher instructed. Do not turn on lights. Do not touch switches. Ventilate immediately. I followed every word. I left Mira by the entrance where the air was safer, then moved quickly inside, covering my mouth with my sleeve. The kitchen was straight ahead. Cupboards stood open as if someone had been reaching for something just before everything went wrong. A pot on the stove had boiled dry. Thin steam curled upward. The burner glowed faintly. My heart dropped. On the floor, half hidden behind the counter, lay a woman. Her blonde hair spread across the tiles like a fan. One arm angled beneath her. The other stretched toward the cabinet, fingers curled as though she had reached for the countertop and missed. I found her, I told the dispatcher. She's unconscious, breathing shallow, gas in the air. I dropped to my knees beside her. Her skin was cold, but not the cold of the storm. It was the cold of someone who had been down for too long. Her pulse fluttered under my fingertips, faint but present. Her face was pale in a way that twisted something inside my chest. That's my mom, Mira cried behind me, her voice cracking in panic. I turned to her. Stay right there. Do not come in. She shook her head, tears spilling fast. She didn't wake up. I tried. I shook her and she didn't wake up. My throat tightened. Mira, listen to me. You did the right thing. You found help. I need you to stay where you are. I'm going to get your mom out. I promise. I opened the nearest window with one hard shove. The cold air rushed in. The dispatcher confirmed the paramedics were minutes away. Minutes felt like forever in a gas-filled kitchen. I slid one arm under the woman's shoulders and the other beneath her knees. She was lighter than I expected. Too light. I lifted her, stood carefully, and backed toward the hallway door. Keep talking to me, Mira, I said as I moved. I need to hear your voice. Is she alive? She choked. Yes, she's breathing. You helped her by finding me. The truth in that statement sank deeper than I wanted to admit. Outside, on the landing away from the gas, the air felt less suffocating. I carried her down the stairs slowly, step by step, fighting the urge to rush. Rushing with an unconscious person was a disaster waiting to happen. Mira clung to my coat with one hand as we reached the lobby. Through the storm outside, the glow of red emergency lights appeared in the distance. Finally! The paramedics arrived within the time frame the dispatcher predicted, pushing through the snow with practiced efficiency. They took one look at the mother in my arms and moved instantly. Oxygen mask, pulse check, verbal commands to each other. They asked basic questions, rapid fire, their voices calm under pressure. I answered everything I could. Mira stood beside me, gripping my leg, watching every movement. Is she going to be okay? She whispered. A paramedic crouched to Mira's level, speaking gently. We're going to take very good care of her. You did something very brave tonight. They loaded Elena onto the stretcher. Seeing her strapped down with lines and monitors tugged something sharp inside me. I followed without waiting to be asked, and when Mira reached for my hand, I gave it without hesitation. The paramedics let me sit in the back of the ambulance with her because the roads were dangerous and there was no time to wait for a second vehicle. The doors closed. The sirens began. Red light washed the inside of the ambulance, flashing across Mira's frightened face. She held the edge of my coat so tightly her knuckles turned white. I kept one arm braced around her shoulders, steadying her as the vehicle jolted over snow and ice. I could feel her heartbeat against my ribs, fast and scared. She leaned into me and whispered. She didn't wake up when I called her. My voice came out low. She will. You found her in time. You found me in time. Her head rested against my chest. The red lights flickered across the walls like distant warnings. I looked down at her small hand gripping my sleeve, and something inside me shifted in a way I did not want to examine too closely. The sirens wailed through the storm as the ambulance sped forward, and all I could think was that if I had chosen my meeting over this moment, I would have been the kind of man I could never forgive. The ambulance doors flew open and cold night air rushed in, mixing with the sterile scent of the hospital as paramedics moved swiftly, pushing Elena's stretcher across the icy pavement and into the bright sliding doors. I stepped out with Mira still clinging to my coat. Her small fingers refused to loosen. The automatic doors parted and the fluorescent lights above us hummed with a hollow sound that made the entire hallway feel colder than the storm outside. Nurses rushed forward, taking vitals, calling orders, directing movement. They guided the stretcher into a trauma room while Mira tried to follow, panic rising in every step she took. I stopped her gently before she crossed the threshold. "We have to wait out here," I said, my voice steady even though my stomach twisted. "They're helping her." She looked at me as if I were the only piece of ground she had left. Her lower lip trembled. "Are they going to let her die?" The words hit harder than the storm ever had. "No," I answered, kneeling so my eyes met hers. "They're doing everything she needs right now, and I'm staying with you, I promise." She pressed her forehead into my shoulder, and for a moment the hallway blurred around us. A nurse approached with a blanket and wrapped it around her. "Sit with her," she said softly to me. "She's been out in the cold too long." I carried Mira to a row of plastic chairs along the wall and sat with her pressed against my side. She curled into me like she had done it 1,000 times before. The adrenaline in my body began to settle, leaving behind a strange ache in my chest that felt too familiar. It reminded me of another hospital, another hallway, another person slipping away. I forced the memory back down. Not now. The overhead announcements echoed through the corridor. A medical cart rattled past. A pair of doctors whispered urgently to each other before disappearing behind a set of double doors. This hall was the kind of place where people's lives changed without warning, and tonight I was sitting in it because a little girl had trusted me more than anyone else in the world. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 27 missed calls, 14 texts. My board meeting had started without me, and judging by the frantic messages, they were not handling my absence well. For the first time in my life, I did not care. Not even a little. "Sir?" I looked up to see a woman with a badge clipped to her sweater. Social worker. Her expression was calm, but watching closely the way people watch when they are assessing a situation they may have to intervene in. "I need to ask a few questions while the medical team works," she said gently. "Is that all right?" Mira tightened her hold on me, but I nodded. "Of course." She crouched down so she was eye level with Mira. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your full name?" "Mira Thompson," she whispered into my coat. "And your mom's name, Elena." The social worker turned her attention to me. "How did you find her?" I explained everything. The storm, the knocking, the gas smell, the unconscious mother, the ambulance. She listened carefully, writing notes on a small tablet, asking only the questions necessary. When she finished, she gave a small, approving nod. "You did everything right," she said. "You probably saved both their lives tonight." I should have felt something triumphant, or at least relieved. Instead, I felt only the heavy, hollow weight of what might have happened if I had driven away. The social worker left us with a soft smile and a promise to update us soon. After she walked off, Mira shifted in my lap, her eyes finally closing. Exhaustion pulled her down fast. Within moments, she was asleep against my chest, her breath warm and uneven. I wrapped the blanket tighter around her and rested my hand on her back, feeling each rise and fall. She was safe, for now. But the image of her kneeling in the snow kept replaying in my mind, each time sharper than before. I leaned my head back against the wall and exhaled slowly. Everything I thought mattered an hour ago felt small, insignificant, almost laughable compared to the weight of the child now asleep in my arms. Minutes stretched into an hour. The trauma room door never opened. Nurses rushed in and out carrying equipment, IV bags, and paperwork. Each time someone passed, I sat up straighter, hoping for news. Finally, a doctor stepped into the hallway, pulling down her mask as she approached. Her expression was serious but not grim. "You're with the patient in room 3?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice tightening. "How is she?" "Your intervention was critical. She collapsed from severe hypotension, likely due to exhaustion and prolonged exposure to gas. She is stable now. There's no sign of brain damage. She will wake up soon." I closed my eyes for a moment as relief washed through me, deeper than I expected, deeper than I was ready for. Mira stirred slightly at the shift in my breathing. The doctor continued. "She will need monitoring for a day or two, and she will be very weak when she wakes. But she is safe." Safe. The word settled into the cold space inside me, softening its edges. "Can we see her?" I asked. "One of you may." "The child should stay here for now. She needs rest." I looked down at Mira. Her tiny fingers still gripped the fabric of my coat, even in her sleep, refusing to let go. "I'll wait," I said quietly. The doctor gave a small nod before returning to the trauma room. Through the glass window, I could see Elena lying motionless, her face pale against the pillow. I had carried her through snow and gas and fear, but seeing her like that behind reflective glass struck harder than lifting her from the floor ever had. This was the moment that tightened something inside me, the moment I realized I had stepped into the lives of 2 strangers without warning, and that walking away was no longer an option I could take. When the trauma room door finally opened again, the doctor stepped out and motioned for me to come inside. Mira was still asleep against my chest, her breath soft and uneven. Her fingers curled in the fabric of my coat like she feared the world would vanish if she let go. I gently eased her onto the chair, tucking the blanket around her. She stirred once but did not wake. I took one last look at her before stepping quietly into the room where her mother lay. The lights were dimmer here, softer than the bright hallway, but everything still carried that unmistakable sterile smell hospitals never managed to hide. Machines beeped in steady rhythms. A warm blanket covered Elena up to her shoulders. Her hair, tangled earlier on the apartment floor, had been brushed back. In the quiet room, her face looked impossibly young and exhausted all at once. I took a step closer, unsure if I should be there. After all, a few hours ago, I did not even know her name. Now, I stood at her bedside, feeling a responsibility that made no logical sense and yet felt unshakable. She shifted slightly, a small movement under the blanket. Her eyelashes fluttered. Then she opened her eyes. For a moment, she stared at the ceiling, dazed and disconnected the way people look when coming back from too far away. Then her gaze drifted searching, trying to remember where she was and why. When her eyes found me, they widened in confusion. She struggled to sit up, but her arm gave out halfway, trembling from the effort. I stepped forward quickly. "Easy," I said. "Take it slow." Her voice came out rough, barely more than a breath. "Mira, where is my daughter?" "She's safe," I answered, and I felt something soften inside me as I said the words. "She's just outside. She fell asleep. She's warm. She's fine." Relief washed across her face so quickly it almost broke me. Her lips trembled. She tried again to sit up, and this time I helped her adjusting the bed so she could lean back comfortably. The gesture felt strangely intimate in a way I did not expect. She blinked a few times, studying me as if trying to piece together a memory. "You found her," she whispered. "You brought her here." I nodded. "She came to my house during the storm. She kept knocking on doors, but no one heard her. The generator across the street was too loud. I saw her on my camera. She told me about you." Her throat worked as she swallowed. She was terrified. She tried to wake me, but I passed out. She paused, eyes lowering in shame. "I should have been stronger. You kept your daughter alive through a storm, through everything you've been dealing with," I said quietly. "That is strength." Her eyes lifted slightly at that. Not fully, just enough to show she heard me. The faint beeping from the monitors filled the silence between us. She looked around the room, confusion returning. "How long have I been here?" "A few hours. The doctors said you collapsed from hypotension and the gas leak." She closed her eyes briefly, as if overwhelmed by the thought of how close she had come to losing everything. When she opened them again, there was something raw in her expression, something that made it hard to look away. "Why?" She began, then hesitated as though afraid to ask. Why would someone like you help someone like me? The question hit harder than I expected. Her voice did not carry self-pity. It carried fear and disbelief. The disbelief of someone who had learned never to expect help from anyone. I looked down at my hands for a moment before answering, surprising myself with the honesty in my voice. Because your daughter asked me not to let you die, and I could not walk away from that. She stared at me in silence, her chest rising and falling slowly beneath the blanket. Then her eyes filled with tears she did not bother wiping away. They slid down her cheeks one by one, quiet and steady. There was no dramatic sobbing, no shaking, just a quiet surrender to the emotion she had fought too long. I looked away, giving her the dignity of not being watched while she broke. When she finally spoke again, her voice was fragile but steady. "Can I see her?" "Of course," I said. I stood and stepped to the doorway, peeking into the hall. Mira was still asleep in the chair, her feet tucked under the blanket, her cheeks flushed with warmth now instead of cold. A nurse passed by and smiled softly. "She's a brave little one." "She is," I replied, before gently lifting her into my arms. She barely stirred as I carried her into the room. When Elena saw her daughter, a sound escaped her. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. Something in between, full of relief and ache. I set Mira gently on the bed beside her mother. The moment Mira felt the familiar touch, she woke with a gasp. "Mommy!" She threw her arms around her mother's neck, burying her face into her shoulder. Elena held her tightly, her fingers trembling as they curled into her daughter's hair. I stepped back, giving them space. For a long time, they stayed like that, clinging to one another, whispering small things I could not hear, the kind of things that belong only to people who almost lost each other. I stood near the foot of the bed, invisible, unnecessary, but unable to leave. A social worker entered quietly a few minutes later and confirmed Elena still retained full custody. The relief on her face was immediate and profound. When they were done, I stepped outside the room, giving mother and daughter the privacy they deserved. But even from the hallway, I could still hear Mira's soft voice, and I could still feel the weight of what I had stepped into. I leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly, realizing that somewhere in the chaos of the night, something in me had shifted, something I had not expected, something I could not ignore. 8 days passed before I saw them again. 8 days of checking the hospital portal for updates, even though the doctor said she would recover. 8 days of wondering why I kept replaying the sight of Mira asleep against my chest, or the way Elena's eyes looked when she realized her daughter was safe. I told myself I was simply making sure the situation was handled, that my involvement ended at the hospital doors. But the truth was far less clean. I thought about them, more than I should have. So when Elena called one morning, her voice quiet and unsure, asking if we could meet for coffee, I said yes before reason had a chance to intervene. The cafe she chose sat between a bookshop and an old florist, a little corner place with golden lights strung along the windows and the smell of cinnamon drifting outside. It was the kind of place people went when they needed warmth more than caffeine. I arrived early, telling myself it was habit, not anticipation. I took a seat at a table near the window and ordered the drinks before they arrived. 2 hot chocolates, 1 black coffee. I was staring at the steam rising from the mugs when the door chimed softly. Mira stepped in first, holding Elena's hand, her winter hat slightly crooked and her cheeks rosy from the cold. She saw me immediately and lifted her free hand in a small wave. Something loosened inside me at the sight. Elena followed, dressed simply in a gray coat and jeans, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, but she held herself with a quiet steadiness I had not noticed the night she woke up in the hospital. She looked better, not strong exactly, but determined. She hesitated only a moment before approaching the table. "Hi," she said softly. "I hope we're not late." "You're not," I answered, standing to pull out her chair. "I just got here." That was a lie. I had been waiting 12 minutes. Mira climbed into the seat across from me, swinging her legs under the table. She reached for the hot chocolate with both hands, but paused when she saw the little marshmallows on top. She glanced up at me. "Is this for me?" "It is," I said. "Do you like it?" She nodded with the kind of enthusiasm only a child can give, then took a careful sip. Elena sat quietly watching her daughter, her hands wrapped around her own mug even though she did not drink from it yet. I wasn't sure if I should call, she admitted after a moment. But I wanted to thank you again, properly this time. You don't have to thank me, I replied. I did what anyone should have done. Her gaze lifted, meeting mine with that same disbelieving softness from the hospital. People don't always do what they should, she said. And you did. She looked away quickly as if embarrassed by the honesty of her own words. For a moment, we sat in silence, the warm hum of the cafe filling the space between us. Then Mira broke it with a question that knocked the breath from both of us. Are we friends now? I blinked. Elena nearly choked on her first sip of coffee. Mira, she said, flustered, that's not how you ask things. Mira shrugged, unconcerned. Well, are we? She looked at me expectantly, marshmallow foam clinging to one corner of her mouth. Something warm tugged at me in a place I had kept locked for years. Yes, I said, more certain than I expected. I think we are. Mira beamed, kicking her feet happily. Elena hid a smile behind her mug. After a few minutes, conversation returned easily, surprisingly comfortably. Elena told me how she was feeling stronger each day, how the doctors planned to let her return to limited work soon. Then she hesitated, as if working up the courage to continue. I used to be an administrative assistant before I had Mira, she said. I was good at it. But when I had to step back, no one wanted to hire me again. Gaps in a resume scare people. I know, I said quietly. But they shouldn't. She looked at me confused. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. I checked your file. You worked at several offices. Good references. Strong performance reviews before. I stopped, not wanting to pry into the part of her history that was clearly painful. She swallowed hard. Before life happened, she finished for me. Yes, there was something honest, earnest, and heartbreakingly simple about it. Life happened, and she had kept moving anyway. We have a program, I said, shifting forward in my chair. Returning Workforce Initiative, designed for people who have been out of the job market for a while but have professional experience. We offer training, transitional support, flexible schedules. She stared at me like she expected a catch. Are you suggesting something? I'm suggesting, I said calmly, that if you want to come back to office work, we will find a place for you. Her breath caught. The look on her face was not joy or excitement. It was fear, the fear of wanting something you are afraid to believe in. I don't want pity, she whispered. This isn't pity, I said. You earned this long before I showed up at your door. She looked down so quickly her hair slipped forward, hiding her face. Mira looked between us, confused by the tension she did not understand. Then she leaned over the table, her voice bright and hopeful. If Mommy works near you, can I come too? I smiled, despite the heaviness of the moment. We can make a place for you. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the small gift I had bought 2 days earlier but pretended was a last-minute idea. A box of crayons and a forest animal sketchbook. I slid it toward her. For when you're waiting for your mom. Mira lit up, tracing the cover with her finger. Elena stared at the gift with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. I know, I answered. For the first time since the hospital, she looked me directly in the eyes, and there was something new in her expression. Something that looked very much like hope, fighting to grow. The day started quietly enough that I should have known something was about to go wrong. Quiet days never last in my life. I worked from home that morning, the sky still gray with leftover frost, and the house warm from the fireplace I had lit more for comfort than necessity. Elena had her interview and onboarding session at our corporate office, and since the nanny I arranged needed time to arrive, I told her not to worry. I would keep an eye on Mira for the first couple of hours. It made sense. I worked from home. My meetings were virtual. There were 3 staff members in the house. Nothing could possibly go wrong. That was what I told myself. Mira wandered through the halls with the sketchbook I had given her humming to herself as she stopped to draw on the corner table or on the bench near the window. Every few minutes she peeked into my office, checking if I was still there, then disappeared again with the confidence of a child who finally felt safe in a place that had never been hers. I got too comfortable with that rhythm, too sure I could balance everything. My calls ran longer than expected. I muted myself, answered one question after another, glanced occasionally at the door, expecting to see Mira's head appear. When she didn't, I assumed she was upstairs with Marie, our housekeeper, or in the reading nook we had set up near the living room. I convinced myself I was still aware, still paying attention, even as my focus slipped deeper into work. 20 minutes passed before something felt off. Not a sound, not a footstep, not the movement of air you sense when a child is nearby. Just silence, a silence that grew heavier the longer it stretched. I stood abruptly, ignoring the confused voice of one of my executives through the screen as I ended the call without explanation. "Mira?" I called, walking toward the stairs. "Where are you, little explorer?" No answer. The hallway upstairs was empty. The reading nook was untouched. The nanny had not arrived yet. Marie was in the linen room folding towels. "Have you seen Mira?" I asked. Marie looked up startled. "No, sir. Not since she came upstairs with her sketchbook." My stomach tightened. I checked every room, the guest bedroom, the play area, even closets. Nothing. The silence was wrong, too absolute. When fear settles into your chest, it does not knock politely. It crashes through tearing holes in logic as it goes. I moved faster, my steps echoing off the wooden floors, as if the house itself had suddenly grown too large. Then I heard it, the faintest sound, a muffled thump. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the floor. For a second, there was nothing. Then again, a thump. And then a voice so thin it nearly vanished before it reached me. "Mr. Aiden, I can't breathe." Panic burst through me so fast the edges of my vision darkened. She was in the basement, the section under renovation, the one I had told her not to enter, the one with sealed doors and unfinished insulation. I ran down the stairs, taking 3 at a time. At the bottom, cold air wrapped around me, the kind of stillness that made the hair on my arms stand up. I found the small storage room door slightly ajar, but locked from the outside. The fire safety mechanism must have clicked shut when she went in. Mira's sobs seeped through the door, shallow and terrified. "Mira, stay with me." "I'm here," I said, pressing my hand flat against the wood. "I can't get it open yet, but I'm going to. I promise." Her breaths came fast and sharp. "It's dark. I can't see. I can't breathe." Something primal snapped inside me. "Marie, I need a crowbar now," I shouted toward the stairs. I did not wait for it. I slammed my shoulder into the door. Pain shot up my arm. The latch held. I hit it again. The wood groaned but did not break. The third hit scraped skin from my elbow, warm blood sliding down my forearm. I barely felt it. All I heard was Mira's panic rising like a drowning heartbeat inside the walls. "Please, please," she whimpered. That sound would haunt me for the rest of my life. I stepped back, braced my leg, and drove my shoulder into the door with everything I had. The wood splintered. One more. I pulled back, ignoring the throbbing pain shooting through my arm, and threw myself at it again. The latch snapped. The door crashed open. The room was pitch dark except for the thin beam of light spilling in from behind me. Mira was curled in the corner, shaking violently, her hands red from pounding the door. She looked so small it nearly broke me in half. I dropped to my knees and gathered her into my arms. She clung to me instantly, pressing her face into my shoulder as if trying to disappear inside my coat. She sobbed against my chest, gasping for each breath. "You're safe. I've got you. I've got you," I whispered again and again because it was the only thing that made sense to say. She trembled so hard I could feel her ribs shake beneath my hand. Slowly, her breathing found a rhythm that did not claw at the air. I sat there on the cold floor, holding her until the trembling eased. Marie appeared in the doorway with the crowbar, her face pale with worry. I shook my head. "It's okay. I have her." She nodded and rushed upstairs to get warm blankets. By the time Elena arrived 20 minutes later, Mira was wrapped in a soft throw on the living room couch tucked against my side, her tiny fingers still gripping the fabric of my shirt as if afraid letting go would make the world collapse again. Elena burst through the door, breathless and wide-eyed. She saw Mira and ran to her, pulling her into her arms, whispering her name over and over in a voice cracking with relief. I stepped back, giving them space. Elena looked up at me finally, her eyes red, her breath shaking. There was no anger in her expression, no blame, only a depth of emotion I could not begin to name. Something inside me jolted at the weight of it, something that felt dangerously close to recognition. The weeks that followed the basement incident felt strangely suspended in a quiet rhythm I had never known before, as if my life had shifted into a gentler orbit without my permission. Elena began her new role in the returning workforce program, and though she was still cautious, still unsure, she approached each day with a determination that was impossible not to admire. She arrived early, stayed focused, learned quickly, and though she kept her head down, I noticed the small changes in her posture, the growing steadiness in her voice, the way she carried herself with more dignity than the circumstances of her life had ever allowed. And Mira. Every afternoon she came to my office after school carrying her sketchbook, her backpack bouncing with each step, her little boots tapping against the floor in a way that always made me stop whatever I was doing. We had set up a small corner for her in the room a week after the basement incident, a round soft rug, a beanbag chair, a shelf with a few children's books, colored pencils, paper. She called it Mira's Corner with the kind of pride usually reserved for kingdoms and castles. Sometimes she would draw quietly while I handled calls. Sometimes she would fall asleep inhaling the scent of the crayons. Sometimes she would ask me questions, endless questions, and somehow I answered every single one, even the ones that hurt, even the ones that reminded me how empty my life had been before this little girl walked into it. It was a slow shift, almost invisible at first, but then one night it became impossible to deny. Elena had worked a long day and was exhausted, though she tried to hide it. Mira asked if they could stay for dinner because she liked the way my kitchen smelled. I was not a man who cooked often, but I found myself saying yes without hesitation. I heated a pot of soup-chopped vegetables with a knife I barely remembered owning and set 3 places at the table. Elena offered to help, but I shook my head and handed her a glass of water instead. She looked surprised, then grateful, then a little ashamed of how grateful she looked. Mira sat at the table, swinging her legs under the chair, telling me about a girl at school who traded her a sticker for a crayon drawing. Elena listened, smiling softly, occasionally smoothing her daughter's hair. She looked so different like this. Not the woman collapsed on a kitchen floor, or the woman trembling in a hospital bed, or the woman terrified by the thought of losing her daughter in a dark basement. She looked real, present, strong in a quiet way that drew the warmth out of every room she entered. Dinner was simple but warm, quiet but full in a way noise could never be. After I cleared the dishes, Mira insisted on taking a picture. She stood between us with her arms around both our necks and leaned in so close her hair tickled my jaw. She asked Marie to take it. When the camera clicked, I felt something settle inside me like a lock turning into place. Later that night, after they left, I found myself staring at the photo on my phone. A simple picture. 3 people sitting close together. Nothing extraordinary. And yet, I could not look away. The next morning, Mira burst into my office holding a crayon portrait she had drawn of the 3 of us at the table. When she set it on my desk with a shy smile, something caught in my throat. It was the first time in years anything had. The dinners continued not regularly, not planned, but naturally. Some nights I cooked. Some nights Elena brought leftovers from home. Some nights we ordered takeout and ate it straight from the containers, laughing when Mira got sauce on her nose. Each meal left a lingering warmth in my chest, one I pretended was just the food, but I knew better. There were nights when the house felt too still after they went home. I would pass Mira's corner and see her forgotten pencil on the rug or the tiny indentation in the beanbag where she had curled up. And the emptiness of the room hit harder than I ever expected. One evening, after a long day at work, I arrived home later than usual. I pushed open the door, and for the first time in a long time, the house felt cold, silent, hollow, too big for a single person. I realized then that somewhere along the way, I had started listening for 2 voices that did not live here. I had started looking for small footprints that did not belong to me. I had started wishing for things I'd never admitted wanting. When Elena texted saying she had made soup and had extra, my response came too fast. They arrived 20 minutes later. Mira ran ahead of her mother, waving her drawing in the air as she shouted that she had added a son to the corner this time because my house looked happier now. Elena laughed a sound that warmed the room more than the fireplace ever could. We ate together again. Then, after dinner, when I was washing dishes at the sink, Elena stepped beside me with a towel and dried the plates as I passed them to her. Our shoulders bumped once. I apologized. She did too. The bump happened again. No one apologized that time. Mira curled up on the couch under a blanket and fell asleep halfway through a storybook, her hand resting on the page as if she were saving her place in a dream. I stood there in the doorway of the living room, watching her sleep, listening to the soft sounds of her breathing and the quiet clinks of dishes as Elena finished cleaning the counter. And for the first time in my life, I realized this was what a home sounded like. Not the expensive silence I had lived with for years. Not the echo of empty rooms, or the hum of appliances, or the quiet hum of my own loneliness. This was warmth. This was belonging. This was life. And it terrified me in a way nothing in my business career ever had. I had built empires, negotiated mergers, survived markets that crushed entire industries. Yet the simple sight of a sleeping child in my home was somehow the thing that broke whatever wall I had built around myself. I stood there gripping the doorframe, trying to steady my breathing, trying to understand how a storm, a knock at my gate, and a whisper from a little girl had rewritten everything I thought I knew about my life. Fall arrived in quiet waves that softened the sharp edges of everything. The leaves in Rockbridge shifted from deep green to amber and gold, drifting across sidewalks in lazy spirals. The air carried that crisp scent of wood smoke and fading summer. It was the kind of season that made ordinary moments feel fragile and fleeting, as if time itself moved with a gentler rhythm. For the first time in years, I let myself slow down enough to notice it. Most days, Elena settled into her new role with a confidence that grew a little more each week. She still kept her guard up at work, always afraid to take up too much space, always waiting for someone to tell her she did not belong, but people liked her. They respected her. They saw her the way I already had. And Mira flourished. She came into my office after school like clockwork, tossing her backpack down and slipping into Mira's corner with a comfort that felt both natural and dangerous. I had never been the center of a child's world. I had never expected to become one. But fall has a way of revealing truths you spend entire summers trying to ignore. It was mid-October when the fear returned, creeping in quietly, the way storms often do. The town held its annual fall festival, a small community event with food stalls, hay rides, and strings of glowing lanterns hung between the oak trees. It was a warm evening rare for fall, and the air buzzed with chatter and laughter. Mira's excitement was impossible to resist. She ran ahead of us with a painted pumpkin on her cheek, weaving through the crowd toward a booth selling caramel apples. Elena walked beside me, the sleeves of her cardigan pushed up as she held the strap of her purse with one hand. Her hair was down for once, soft waves brushing her shoulders. She looked peaceful. I remember thinking that I had never seen her look more at ease, more like someone who was beginning to believe she deserved the life she was building. We reached the booth, and Elena leaned down to wipe sticky caramel from Mira's fingers. "Slow down," she said gently. "You'll make yourself sick." "I won't," Mira insisted, licking her fingers with undeniable joy. I paid for the apples and handed the vendor the change. When I looked up, Mira was gone. At first, I assumed she was just on the other side of the booth. Children move fast. They wander. They get distracted. I reminded myself to breathe. Mira Elena called, scanning the crowd. No answer. My pulse quickened. I stepped around the booth. Nothing. I checked the line of people waiting for popcorn. Nothing. Elena's voice shook as she called again, louder this time. Mira. The noise of the festival swallowed her voice. A tremor shot down my spine. This was different from before. This was open space. This was a crowd. This was a world full of people who might not notice a little girl slipping away. My chest tightened with a familiar crushing pressure. A pressure I had felt once before in a hospital hallway. A pressure I had promised myself I would never feel again. Where was she standing? I asked, forcing my voice steady. Right here. She was right here. Elena's hands shook. Mira's small footprints in the dust disappeared within seconds under the steps of strangers. I scanned the crowd again. Lanterns glowed overhead, casting golden light on laughing faces. But none were hers. Panic clawed up my throat. Mira, I shouted louder than the music, louder than anything around us. For a terrifying stretch of seconds, nothing answered. Then, a tiny voice rose from the other side of the pumpkin carving table. I'm here! Mira popped out from behind a stack of hay bales, completely unaware of the terror she had caused. She held a paper cup filled with cider samples, sipping with exaggerated sophistication. They said I could try one, she announced proudly. Elena broke first. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees and pulling Mira into her arms with a force that startled the child. Don't ever wander off like that again, she whispered into her daughter's hair, her breath shaking. You scared me. You scared both of us. Mira looked at me then, and what she saw in my face must have frightened her more than anything Elena said. Are you mad at me? She asked in a small voice. I crouched down, but I could not trust my own voice just yet. The terror was still too close, too sharp. My hands trembled against my thighs. No, I finally said, though the word scraped out rough. I'm not mad. I lifted a hand and placed it gently on her cheek. I was scared. Mira leaned into my touch, frowning as if trying to understand a world bigger than her. Elena stood behind her, watching me with eyes that held too much understanding, too much recognition. The three of us stayed like that for several long moments, the lanterns swaying overhead, the crowds moving around us as if we were an island carved out of fear and relief. When Mira tugged my hand and asked if we could go home, I agreed immediately. The walk back to the car was quiet. Too quiet. Mira held Elena's hand with a newly found seriousness, and Elena kept glancing at me as if she wanted to say something but could not find the words. Later that night, long after they had gone home, I sat in my living room replaying the moment she disappeared. The cold rush of terror, the pounding of my heart, the way my vision narrowed until all I could see was the possibility of losing her, losing them. A message arrived on my phone, then soft as a whisper. Thank you for loving her the way you do. I stared at the sentence for so long the screen dimmed twice. Loving. The word hit like a blow and a bomb at the same time. I did not respond. I could not. Because for the first time since this began, I understood just how dangerous this was becoming and how impossible it would be to turn back. The rain arrived without warning, rolling in from the mountains like a dark tide that swallowed the last traces of daylight. By early evening, the entire town felt wrapped in a wet, trembling hush, every rooftop dripping, every window streaked with runnels of water that blurred the world outside. I had just finished a late call when my phone buzzed with a message from Elena. The roads are flooding near our apartment. They are rerouting traffic. We cannot get home. Before she could send another message, I replied, Come here. Do not wait in the storm. The 3 dots that signaled she was typing appeared, disappeared, then reappeared again, as if she were debating how much of her hesitation to reveal. Are you sure? Yes. Come. 20 minutes later, I opened my door to find both of them soaked from the rain. Mira ran in first, clutching her stuffed rabbit against her chest, her hair dripping down her back in tangled curls. Elena followed with slower steps, her cardigan damp, her cheeks flushed from the cold. I took her coat, hanging it near the fireplace where the heat would reach it. The roads are a mess, she said quietly. Half the downtown lights are out. You made the right choice coming here, I said. She gave a small nod, brushing wet strands of hair behind her ear. I tried not to stare at the way her fingers trembled. We changed Mira into one of the soft pajama sets I kept stocked in the guest room for nights when she fell asleep on my couch or refused to go home. She bounced onto the sofa while I warmed soup on the stove, and Elena toweled her hair dry. Thunder rumbled distantly, a low growl rolling across the sky. The lights flickered. Mira flinched and scooted closer to her mother. Elena stroked her hair, whispering something soft and reassuring. Later after dinner, Mira's nerves settled and her exhaustion caught up to her. She curled up in the corner of the couch under a blanket, her stuffed rabbit tucked to her chest, her eyelids heavy. Within minutes she was asleep, the storm no longer quite powerful enough to scare her awake. I covered her more fully with the blanket before heading to the kitchen where Elena was gathering dishes. "You do not have to clean," I told her, reaching for the plates. "You cooked," she replied. "This is the least I can do. You made half the meal." "Then we are even," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. We worked side by side, her drying as I washed. The storm beat against the windows, the steady drumming mixing with the soft clink of dishes. When our hands brushed as I passed her a plate, neither of us moved away. It was a small touch, barely more than the graze of warm skin, but it sent a current through me powerful enough to still my breath. She must have felt it too, because the towel slipped from her fingers, falling to the floor with a soft thud. She bent to pick it up, but her hand paused halfway down, as if she needed a moment to steady herself. I cleared my throat, but my voice came out rough. "Are you cold?" "No," she whispered without looking up. "Not cold." She stood again, the towel in her hands, her fingers twisting the edges. For a long moment, we simply stood there, the warm glow of the kitchen lights softening the edges of everything around us. The storm outside felt distant, muted, unimportant. She was the first to break the silence. "I never thanked you for—" She gestured vaguely toward the living room, toward the memory of the basement, the hospital, the storm, the thousands of moments between then and now, everything she finished. "You have done everything. I have not," I said quietly. "I have just done what I could." "Most people do not," she replied. She finally lifted her eyes to mine. There was something unguarded in them, something I had never seen so clearly before. "You do not just help us," she said softly. "You steady us." The words hit deeper than she could have known. For years, I had been steadying things, buildings, deals, strangers, numbers on a screen, the hollow architecture of a life that looked impressive from the outside and empty from every angle inside. But no one had ever said I steadied them. No one had ever looked at me the way she looked at me in that moment. Her voice was quiet, but it wrapped around the edges of my guard and pulled. "Aiden." My name in her voice was something I had not been prepared for. She had spoken it before, of course, but never like this. Never gently. Never with trust. Never like a promise. The storm cracked in the distance, lightning brightening the windows for a brief second, and I felt something inside me shift so sharply it hurt. I took a step closer, not touching her, not crossing the fragile boundary between us, but close enough to breathe the same air, close enough to feel her warmth in the space between us. She did not move away. She did not speak. She just looked at me as if waiting for something neither of us could name. A moment stretched between us, long and electric. Then Mira stirred on the couch, murmuring in her sleep. The spell broke without shattering. Elena looked toward her daughter, then back at me. There was no embarrassment in her expression, no apology, only something soft, something real, something that felt like the beginning of a truth neither of us had been brave enough to say aloud. When she turned off the kitchen light, her fingers brushed the back of my hand as she passed me. It was not an accident, and it was not a request. It was simply an acknowledgement of something already there, slowly unfolding between us like the quiet opening of a door we had both pretended was locked. Winter settled over the town in a slow, unhurried way, like a blanket being pulled gently across rooftops and streets and quiet front porches. By the first week of December, the air carried the faintest smell of pine from the mountain forests, and every morning I woke to find frost tracing delicate patterns across the windows of my house. For the first time in years, I did not meet the season with indifference. I noticed it. I felt it, maybe because they were a part of it now. That first Saturday of December, Elena and Mira arrived in the early afternoon, Mira bursting through the door with the same bright energy she carried everywhere. "We brought cookies," she announced, holding up a tin wrapped with a green ribbon that she had clearly insisted on tying herself. The bow was crooked and perfect in a way only a 7-year-old's hands could make it. Elena stepped inside, behind her cheeks flushed from the cold, the faintest sheen of snow melting on her hair. I took her coat, brushing a stray flake from the collar, and she gave me a look that lasted 1 second longer than a polite greeting should. Mira rushed into the living room to set her tin on the coffee table before climbing onto the couch and bouncing twice, testing the cushions like she always did. I followed with Elena and lit the fireplace, the soft scent of cedar filling the room. Mira curled near the warmth while Elena and I unpacked groceries in the kitchen. She reached for a mixing bowl at the same moment I did, our hands brushing, a small spark of awareness passing between us. Neither of us commented on it. Neither of us needed to. As the evening settled in the house, filled with the sounds of soft music and the faint crackling of the fire, Mira decorated gingerbread cookies at the table with such intensity that her tongue stuck slightly out of her mouth while she concentrated. Elena and I sat beside her laughing whenever Mira insisted we try her creations, which were more icing than cookie. Then she found the sketchbook I kept for her in the drawer of the console table. She sat near the fire, flipping through it until she reached a blank page and began to draw. I watched her carefully outline 3 small figures under a crooked triangle that I recognized only after a moment as a Christmas tree. When she finished coloring the last of it, she brought the sketch to us with the proud smile only children can produce. She held the page out to me first, 3 people hand in hand. A tall figure with broad shoulders, a woman with long hair, a little girl with a round face and a pink scarf. All of us under snow, all of us standing close. I stared at the drawing longer than I meant to. Elena watched me, her expression softening. Mira tugged on my sleeve. "Do you like it?" I swallowed my voice, catching for a moment before I could answer. "I love it!" Mira beamed before skipping away to hang it on the fridge using a small magnet shaped like a fox. The image stayed in my vision even after she walked away. 3 people, together, without hesitation, without second guessing. When dinner was ready, Elena served plates while I poured warm cider. Mira sat between us, her shoulders brushing ours whenever she leaned in to reach for something. The scene was so ordinary and so quiet and so deeply right that I found myself holding my breath, afraid to disturb it. After dinner, we cleaned up the kitchen together, our movements falling into an easy rhythm we never planned but had somehow grown into. At one point, Elena reached for a dish towel and her hand landed gently on mine. She did not pull away. Neither did I. The warmth of her fingers lingered long after she moved to the sink. Later, after Mira brushed her teeth and changed into the soft pajamas she kept in my guest room, she wandered into the living room carrying a blanket. She climbed onto the couch and curled against me without saying a word. Her small hand rested on my arm as naturally as if it had always belonged there. Elena watched from the hallway, leaning against the doorframe with a tenderness she did not try to hide. After a moment, she walked toward us and sat down on the other side of Mira, smoothing the girl's hair until her breathing slowed into sleep. I looked at Elena across the top of Mira's head. Something unspoken passed between us. Something warm and steady and profoundly simple. A quiet understanding of what we were becoming, what we already were. When Mira finally drifted into deep sleep, Elena lifted her gently and carried her to the guest room, tucking her in with the care of someone who cherished every breath her daughter took. I stood in the doorway watching her smooth the blanket over Mira's shoulder. The soft light from the lamp turned her hair into gold. When she turned toward me, she stepped close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath. "She feels safe here," she whispered. "So do I." My throat tightened. Words should have come, but none did. Instead, I guided her back to the living room where the fire glowed low and warm. She sat beside me, her knee brushing mine. Outside, snow began to fall again in slow, drifting spirals. Elena rested her hand on the cushion between us. I placed mine beside it close enough that our fingers touched. She did not move away. For the first time in years, I felt something settle inside me, something steady and grounded, something like belonging. That night, we did not name anything. We did not need to. We simply sat together in the quiet glow of the fire, all the pretending finally slipping away. By the time the clock chimed midnight and the snow piled softly against the windows, we were no longer 3 people trying to figure out where we belonged. We were already a family. We just had not said it aloud yet. Christmas Eve arrived with a soft snowfall that dusted the quiet streets like powdered sugar, muffling every sound except the faint crunch beneath passing footsteps. By late afternoon, my house had filled with the smell of cinnamon, warm vanilla and pine. From the tree, Mira insisted we decorate twice because she changed her mind about ornament placement. The living room glowed with gold lights. The fireplace crackled softly, and music played low from the speaker, the kind of old holiday songs people sing under their breath without realizing. I looked around at the small gathering that had formed. It was not a large party. I never liked large parties. It was just a few people from work who had become loyal over time. A neighbor who always brought a tray of roasted pecans, and of course Elena and Mira, who had arrived earlier in the day with a basket of cookies tied with a red ribbon. They brought warmth that no decoration could duplicate. Elena moved through the room with an ease that felt surprising, only because of how natural it was, her soft sweater catching the glow of the lights, her hair pulled back loosely. She laughed quietly at something one of my managers said, the sound slipping into the air like something delicate and grounding at the same time. Mira ran between adults with her little reindeer socks sliding on the wooden floor, her giggles bursting whenever someone pretended to grab her. I watched them both, realizing that somewhere along the months I had stopped looking at them as visitors in my life. They were my center now. They were the reason the house no longer echoed with emptiness. As evening deepened, people gradually filtered out with well wishes, coats wrapped tight, cheeks pink from warmth and wine. The door closed behind the last guest, leaving only the three of us standing in the soft, golden quiet of the living room. Mira tugged my sleeve. "Can we open just one present?" she asked, bouncing slightly and pointing at the tree. Elena laughed, shaking her head. "It is late, sweetheart." "Just one," Mira pleaded. I knelt beside her. "How about we save the presents for tomorrow, and tonight we make a wish?" Her eyes brightened. "Does it have to be secret? It can be whatever you want." She closed her eyes and clasped her hands dramatically. I watched her lips move silently before she finished with a long breath and wrapped her arms around my neck. "I already wished," she whispered. "I wished for you to stay." My chest tightened with a pressure that felt almost painful in its honesty. Elena watched from a few feet away, her eyes softening, her hand pressing lightly against her heart as if to steady it. After we tucked Mira into the guest room, she fell asleep almost instantly, the excitement of the night finally exhausting her small body. I pulled the blanket to her chin, smoothing her hair while Elena stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a tenderness she did not bother to hide. When we stepped back into the living room, the house felt warm still and filled with something almost sacred. The crackle of the fire was the only sound, soft and steady. Elena moved to the couch, wrapping her arms around herself as if unsure of what to do with her hands or with the quiet between us. I walked to the cabinet where I had hidden a small box for weeks. It was not a ring. There was no velvet, no diamonds, nothing traditional. I was not ready for something that looked like a cliché. What I had chosen felt more honest for who we were and where we had come from. When I turned back to her, she watched me with a gentle uncertainty, her expression open, unguarded. I took a slow breath and crossed the room. Instead of sitting beside her, I lowered myself to one knee on the soft rug. Her breath caught audibly. "Aiden," she said, barely more than a whisper, as if the moment might shatter if she spoke too loudly. I did not reach for her hand. I wanted her to hear every word without distraction. "You came into my life on a night I never expected," I began softly. "And you asked me for help in the smallest voice I have ever heard." Her eyes glistened, memories flickering across her expression. I continued. "Since then, you have shown me strength I did not know I was missing. You have shown me what it feels like to come home to something more than a quiet house. And your daughter," my voice faltered. I took a breath. "Your daughter has given me a reason to become someone better than I was." Elena's hand rose to her mouth, her shoulders trembling with emotion she did not try to hide. "This is not a proposal," I said gently. "I am not asking for vows or promises you are not ready for." She lowered her hand slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. "Then what are you asking for?" "I am asking for the privilege," I said, "of coming home to you. Every day. To both of you." Her breath broke in a soft gasp. "Elena," I continued, my voice quieter now but steady, "if you will let me, I want to be part of your life. Not above it, not outside it, with you." She stood from the couch without looking away, her steps slow and careful as if she were moving through water. When she reached me, she placed her hand against my cheek. Her thumb brushed my jaw, warm and trembling. "You already are," she whispered. I exhaled the kind of breath that had waited months to be released. I opened the small box and held it up to her. Inside were 2 bracelets woven from simple leather, each one engraved with a single word. "Ours." She inhaled sharply, tears spilling freely now. "For you and Mira," I said, "if you want them." She knelt in front of me, then her forehead nearly touching mine. "We want you," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of it. Mira stirred from the doorway, rubbing her eyes, drawn by the soft voices. She saw the box, saw me kneeling, saw her mother's tears, and ran to us. "Are we a family now?" she asked, breathless with hope. Elena and I looked at each other. I placed the smaller bracelet around Mira's wrist, fastening it gently. "Yes," I said. "If you want to be." Mira threw her arms around both of us. Elena followed, folding into the embrace. The 3 of us held each other in the warm glow of the lights, wrapped in something that felt like the truth finally spoken. Snow drifted against the tall windows in slow, quiet spirals, settling over the world, like a soft curtain drawn for the final scene of a long story. Inside the house, the lights glowed, warmly golden reflections dancing across the glass, the fireplace humming with a steady comfort that felt almost like a heartbeat. It was late past midnight, the kind of hour when everything gentle becomes clearer and everything unspoken becomes loud. Mira had fallen asleep first. She always did after days filled with excitement, her energy burning bright before collapsing into the deep, trusting rest only children seem to achieve. She lay curled in my lap now, her cheek pressed against my chest, her small fingers bunched in the fabric of my sweater as if even in dreams she needed the comfort of something solid. I held her carefully, one hand supporting her back, the other smoothing the hair from her forehead. Her breathing was slow, warm, a quiet rhythm settling into mine. Elena sat beside me on the couch, her knees pulled slightly toward me, her shoulder resting lightly against my arm. She watched Mira for a long time, her expression soft in a way that always made something inside my chest lift and ache at the same time. Then she looked up at me. It was not a long look, not dramatic, but it carried weight. Gratitude, worry, relief. Hope, and something deeper than all of them, something steadier. "She feels safe with you," Elena whispered as if the moment itself demanded softness. "She has never slept this peacefully anywhere else." I swallowed, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. "I think I do too," she added, even quieter. Those words reached places inside me I did not know were still capable of feeling. I wanted to answer, but my voice refused to come, immediately caught somewhere between emotion and disbelief at the life forming around me. So instead, I shifted slightly, careful not to wake Mira, and Elena leaned into me more fully, letting her head rest against my shoulder. The warmth of her closeness moved through me like something I had been deprived of for years without realizing. For a long while, we said nothing. The house held the silence for us, shaping it into something soft rather than empty. The fire popped occasionally, embers settling. The snow outside deepened into a thicker blanket. The world beyond the windows felt distant enough to forget. Aiden Elena finally murmured, her voice a thread that barely rose above the crackle of the fire. I hummed in response, not trusting my voice yet. Tonight felt like... She hesitated, searching for the right word. Like something that was supposed to happen. I exhaled slowly. It did. You mean that she asked, her tone fragile, as if she feared the answer could undo everything? I do. She nodded softly, her cheek brushing the fabric of my shirt. I was scared, she admitted, of what it would mean, of hoping for too much, of needing you too much. I understood more than she knew. I had spent years avoiding the very thing that now sat against my chest and shoulder, breathing softly and trusting me without question. "You are allowed to need people," I said quietly. "You do not have to carry everything alone." Her fingers curled lightly around the edge of my sleeve, a small gesture but filled with so much unspoken truth. "And what about you?" she asked. "Do you let people carry some of your weight now?" I looked down at Mira sleeping soundly in my arms, then at Elena, whose presence no longer felt like something temporary or fragile. "I am learning," I answered. "Because of you." because of her. Elena's eyes shimmered. She blinked slowly as if absorbing every word before letting out a breath that sounded like relief. She reached up and touched my face, the gesture gentle tracing the edge of my jaw. "You saved us this year," she whispered. I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "You saved me." She looked at me with confusion, as if unable to see herself the way I did. I let the words come, then slow and honest. "Before you, I came home to silence every night. A house with lights but no warmth. Rooms with furniture but no laughter. I lived in a world that was full, but I was empty. I did not even realize how empty until the night a little girl knocked on my gate. Mira stirred slightly against my chest, nuzzling closer, settling again. I let my hand rest protectively over her small shoulders. "You gave me something I did not know I was missing," I continued. "Something I thought was not meant for me. A life that feels real. A life that feels full." Elena's breath hitched. "Aiden, I do not know what the next year will look like," I said. "I do not know what challenges we will face. But I do know one thing." She lifted her head slightly, waiting. "I am not going anywhere," I told her. "Not tomorrow. Not next month. Not next year. I am here. With you. With her. For as long as you want me." A tear slipped down Elena's cheek. She brushed it away quickly, but not quickly enough for me to miss. She took my free hand, threading her fingers through mine, holding on with a quiet strength that told me she had been waiting a long time to hear words like these. "Then we will walk into the next year together," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. We sat like that for what felt like hours, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in quiet, wrapped in something that felt almost sacred. The fire dimmed eventually, the last embers glowing faintly. The snow thickened against the windows, the world fading gently into white. Mira slept on safe and warm. Elena rested against me, safe and warm. And for the first time in my life, I felt a deep, steady peace settle inside me. A home not built from stone or success or solitude, but from two people who had somehow stitched themselves into the empty spaces of my life. A promise not spoken in vows or ceremonies, but lived in each gentle touch and every whispered breath. A family that did not need a label to be real. As the night drew to a close, I tightened my arm around them both, the weight of the moment anchoring me completely. "Whatever comes," I whispered into the quiet, "we face it together." And in that stillness, in the soft warmth of the room, in the slow drift of snow outside, I felt the truth of it settle deeper than anything ever had. They had saved me, and I would spend the rest of my life making sure they never doubted it. Sometimes stories end quietly, not with fireworks or applause, but with the simple truth that love arrives in the places where we least expect it. If you stayed with me until this final moment, then maybe this story reached a part of you that still believes in second chances and kindness, that survives the storms of life and the quiet courage it takes for people to choose hope again. And if it touched you even a little, I want to thank you for being here, for giving your time, your heart, your memories to a journey that mirrors pieces of all of us. Because the truth is, behind every door we pass on the street, there is someone holding on, someone trying their best. Someone waiting for a sign that the world has not forgotten them. I used to think stories like this belonged only in books, in movies, in the wishful corners of our imagination. But then a small girl whispered for help, and my world shifted. Maybe yours shifted a little too as you listened. Maybe you remembered a moment in your own life when someone showed up just when you needed it most, or maybe you wished someone had. Maybe you felt the weight of raising a family alone, or the ache of coming home to an empty house after a long day. Maybe you know what it feels like to carry strength for everyone else while quietly hoping someone someday will say, "You don't have to do this alone." If this story reminded you of anything in your own heart, I hope you hold on to that feeling. Not just as entertainment, not just as background noise while you cook dinner or fold laundry, but as a small reminder that kindness still belongs in this world, and so do you. Stories like these are not about perfect people or perfect love. They are about flawed, tired, hopeful souls who keep showing up anyway. They are about the moments when life gives us the smallest window of grace and whispers, "Try again." And if this story gave you even one breath of comfort, one quiet sense of being understood, one warm reminder that gentleness still matters, then I hope you stay with us. Because this channel is not just a place for storytelling, it is a place for healing, for remembering, for rediscovering the goodness we almost stopped believing in. Every time you watch, every time you leave a comment, share a memory, or simply sit with a story until the final word, you help create a little more light in a world that can feel unbearably cold. And if you choose to subscribe or follow, you are not just clicking a button. You are choosing to walk with us into more stories of courage, of family, of imperfect people, finding their way back to love. But whether you do or you don't, I want you to know this: you matter here. Your presence matters. Your story matters. And I am grateful you spent this time with mine. If you have loved, lost hope, fallen apart, rebuilt yourself, or carried someone through a storm, then you already understand why stories like this exist. We tell them because life is hard. We tell them because love is harder. But we also tell them because in the smallest, quietest ways, these stories remind us that we are still capable of choosing each other. So before you go, take a moment for yourself. Breathe. Let your shoulders drop. Let the warmth of the last scene stay with you. And if you feel something soft tugging inside your chest, do not ignore it. That is your heart remembering that goodness still lives here. Thank you for watching, for listening, for staying until the final breath of this story. Until next time, I hope you stay kind, stay brave, and keep believing in the quiet power of love that shows up exactly when we stop expecting it.